blessing and a curse.
Is it? Yeah.
Because I love the fans. They are our joy, why we make the show. But sometimes they can...
After one small comment on a podcast, Peter Dinklage managed to upset nearly every little person in Hollywood. Do you know that you took work away from me? Peter became one of the most respected actors of his generation by refusing to let Hollywood reduce him to the stereotypical roles little people often get. But since he has reached the pinnacle of success in the industry, he may have forgotten just how many dwarf actors are still relying on those exact jobs to survive. Because what sounded like him standing up for his community actually may have resulted in Hollywood erasing little people from the screen entirely. It's so bad that some little people are comparing it to the physical version of blackface. As an aspiring actor with achondroplasia, Dinklage was determined to avoid low-hanging fruit opportunities that might have helped his career. He said, "I was in an office for quite some time, longer than I should have been, but I was terrified of not being able to pay the bills. I was turning down acting roles, which weren't really acting roles, commercials and stuff like that, so I just stayed in this cubicle for a few years." Dinklage started out in a very common position that a lot of little people confront when aspiring to be actors. Most were traditionally cast for fantasy roles, which Dinklage found disgusting and cruel. Actors with dwarfism are relegated to being creatures. They're not really complex human beings, so I was not really interested in that. But ultimately, he knew his career wouldn't take off unless he made a few compromises. There were a number of films where his dwarfism contributed to the role, but he wasn't being paraded around as a creature or prop. Instead, he was able to show more emotional depth with dwarfism just being a part of the character, like how he starred as a defeated actor in the dark meta-comedy Living in Oblivion with Steve Buscemi. Buscemi recommended him for a role in Alexander Rockwell's comedy 13 Moons when Dinklage couldn't find an agent. And it was with this exposure that Dinklage was able to show who he really was. Rockwell openly talked about how his first impressions disappeared the second he got to know him. "He might come in with some luggage about Peter's physicality," Rockwell said. "Right away, he cuts right through that. You're thinking he's a dwarf. He's a dwarf. But Peter comes shining through as a personality beyond any kind of diminutive size issue." And pretty much anyone who met Dinklage felt the same way. He was wonderfully articulate and insightful, and clearly wanted to be seen as more than just a tour factor. At the same time, he didn't want his size to be the focus of every conversation. But when he did speak about little people in Hollywood, his approach was usually thoughtful rather than confrontational. He wasn't publicly attacking others or aggressively calling out studios by name. He simply believed the industry should slowly move beyond using dwarves as simple fantasy characters or visual gimmicks and start giving them the same depth and complexity as any other performer. Not dangerous, but they are kind of, they're creatures, they're ethereal beings, these dwarves usually are, and then they're asexual, and they're either fools or they're very filled with wisdom and have all the answers but a bit removed and, they never get the princess. That's fine, but we're in the modern day now, and I think if we still have that, I don't want to throw words like stereotypes out in this interview. I want to avoid that. But it'll just perpetuate itself, and I see it in today's films and pieces of art. I'm not interested in playing those things. In that clip, you can feel his hesitance like he was walking a fine line, because in the back of his mind, he knew that these stereotypical roles also give little people consistent jobs in the industry, which is important for them to be able to take to then one day advance their careers. In 2003, Dinklage would get a role as a train enthusiast named Finn McBride in Tom McCarthy's The Station Agent. "Hey buddy, where's Snow White? Grumpy or sleepy over there, huh?" While having dwarfism was a central point of his character, he didn't mind, because Finn had the depth he was looking for. The movie was pretty brilliant because it found a way to make you forget about his size until someone abusive confronted him with prejudice. You spent most of the hour and 30 minutes trying to figure out exactly how he felt. Often, roles written for someone my size are a little flat. I love this about this character that Tom wrote. He has this stuff going on. He has romance. He's got romantic feelings. He's got anger. And he's got flaws. I'm not a spokesperson or an activist for people my size. I'm not going to get on my soapbox about that stuff. Comical movies starring dwarves, such as Austin Powers films, because people can do what they want to do. Sure, it might perpetuate a stereotype, but I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I have a grand time at those movies. I was laughing my butt off at those movies, so I'm not going to cast my judgment upon it. For me personally, that's something I try and stay away from. That same year, he starred in The Station Agent. Dinklage took another minor role in one of the most iconic Christmas movies of the 21st century, Elf. Every Christmas season, little people in Hollywood get the call to play Santa's helpers, but the movie Elf was different. The only actual dwarf who was cast in the film was Peter Dinklage, and he didn't play an elf, but rather Miles Finch, a successful children's author. The short scene he's in is simple yet extremely layered. Buddy, the actual elf, who is 6'3", sees a short man and immediately assumes he must secretly be one of Santa's elves. Not a businessman, not a normal person, just a fantasy creature. Does Santa know that you left the workshop? You know, we're all laughing our heads off. Did you have to borrow a reindeer to get down here? Buddy not treating him like a regular guy represents the exact frustration Dinklage had spent years dealing with in real life. Also, Peter's character, in and of itself, seems like a protest against the roles that Hollywood usually offers little people. Instead of playing the magical elf, Dinklage plays the man insulted by being mistaken for one. But they still did use his physical stature to make the scene funny. Finch hilariously runs across the table, which seemingly takes him forever, then whips Buddy despite the obvious size disadvantage. And this balance is what made the role feel so representative of Dinklage himself. He never wanted to pretend his dwarfism didn't exist. He just didn't want it to be the only thing people saw when they looked at him. He would take that same approach with his character Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones, which launched Peter into mainstream success, making him a full-blown A-list star. When Dinklage found himself talking to the co-creator of Game of Thrones, David Benioff, he was extremely cautious about taking on a fantasy role. But David had actually met Peter at dinner parties and felt he was the obvious choice for Tyrion Lannister. He was always much friendlier to my wife Amanda than he was to me. I knew he was incredibly funny, incredibly smart, and had that caustic wit. Game of Thrones was a TV adaptation of a book written by George R.R. Martin. But in that meeting with Benioff and the other co-creator Dan Weiss, before anyone explained Game of Thrones or Tyrion Lannister to him, he made a simple request. No beard, no pointy shoes. Dwarves in these genres always have this look. My guard was up. Not even my guard. My metal fence. My barbed wire was up. Even Lord of the Rings had dwarf tossing jokes in it. It's like really. But he learned from Benioff and Weiss that Tyrion was a different kind of fantasy little person. He's somebody who turns that on its head. No beard, no pointy shoes, a romantic, real human being. End quote. Even off-screen, he seemed to take the part very seriously. When asked if he had read the books, he admitted that he'd only read the first in fear it would interfere with his performance in future seasons. I don't want to know what happens to me down the road. I'm terrified, and I don't want to play any sort of ending when I'm doing this show, and I just live and breathe this show, and I'm so embarrassed when I have why? But Dinklage initially believed that the potential success of Game of Thrones was too good to be true. If something feels that good, it's not going to open. This is not going to work. Nobody's going to buy this. In the first season, we didn't have any money, truly. I mean, it's all relative. We had some money, but even at the end, if you visited our base camp, our trailers were the same as they were in the first season. It was really, and I think that's what made the spirit of all of us come together so well, and the crew, we roughed it, man. You really would never know. Our salaries got higher as it went along, but the conditions were kind of great, like an indie movie almost. I mean, the sets were extraordinary, and the costumes were extraordinary. That didn't feel indie, but the vibe did, and I think that's what really. But to answer your question, no, I was kind of cynical, like this is great, nobody's gonna go for it. Over the next 4 seasons, his character became the fan favorite of the entire show. Peter Dinklage made Tyrion so believable and human that when fans began criticizing the show's writing near season 8, they blamed the writers instead of Dinklage for how the character devolved. Regardless of the way the show eventually ended, which many felt was terrible, Dinklage had finally gained the respect of Hollywood on a massive scale. He received 7 major awards, including an Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Drama Series. And with an estimated $25 million net worth and worldwide recognition, all the gates of Hollywood opened for Peter in a way that they never had for dwarves in the past. He was basically able to handpick any career opportunity he wanted, hosting Saturday Night Live, playing Bolivar Trask in the X-Men franchise, voice acting in the Angry Birds movie, or acting as Atri in Avengers: Infinity War. Now, if Peter wanted to act as a dwarf, it was a choice. I feel really lucky, although I hate that word, lucky. It cheapens a lot of hard work. Living in Brooklyn in an apartment without any heat, and paying for dinner at the bodega with dimes. I don't think I felt myself lucky back then. Doing plays for $50 and trying to be true to myself as an artist, and turning down commercials where they wanted a leprechaun. Saying I was lucky negates the hard work I put in, and spits on the guy who's freezing his ass off back in Brooklyn. So, I won't say I'm lucky. I'm fortunate enough to find or attract very talented people. For some reason, I found them and they found me. Unfortunately, Peter Dinklage didn't seem to understand that his voice now carried a ton of weight in industry decisions. He had the kind of star power that can get people fired, and even cause production to stop, if the vision didn't fit exactly what he wanted. While it seemed like Dinklage used to be a lot more careful with his words, he probably didn't feel like he needed to do that anymore, and his comments on the Marc Maron show would harm opportunities for the community he tried to uplift for so long. And it all started with the disaster that was the remake of a Walt Disney classic, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In 2021, Disney started casting for the main roles in a live-action remake of Snow White. But before they even started filming, the entire decision was drowning in controversy. People were already resistant of live actions as a total cash grab. But the decision to cast Rachel Zegler for the main role received criticism for countless reasons. Some were racially driven, like questioning why a woman of Latin descent was playing a character whose skin is described as the fairest of them all. Others were critical of her open hatred for the original story and desire to change it into something modern, but most people just simply thought she was annoying. There is a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Yeah, weird. But then Peter Dinklage unexpectedly became a part of the controversy when the media pulled a soundbite from comedian Marc Maron's WTF podcast. Peter criticized Disney for celebrating the casting of Rachel Zegler while refusing to acknowledge that the story itself could be insensitive towards little people. Literally no offense to anything, but I was a little taken aback by, they're very proud to cast a Latina actress as Snow White, but you're still telling the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Take a step back and look at what you're doing there. It makes no sense to me. You're progressive in one way, but then you're still making that backward story of 7 dwarves living in a cave. What the hell are you doing, man? Have I done nothing to advance the cause? Now, for anyone unfamiliar with the story of Snow White, the dwarves do not live in a cave. They work in a mine, but actually live together in a small cottage where they take Snow White in after she escapes the evil queen, making them quite literally the heroes of the story. Also, what's interesting about this is Peter says, "Have I done nothing to advance the cause?" Implying that his success as a serious actor, as well as speaking on behalf of little people, should have gotten through to Hollywood that casting dwarves in fantasy roles is insensitive. But then a moment later, he also questions if a dwarf community even exists, and if it does, then he is not the voice of it. The dwarf community is tired of this. Is there one? I don't know. Well, that's the thing, right? In order to seek representation, you have to have a community movement, which also is the heart of what becomes the issue of wokeness. But it's such a minority, I know. And I'm not affiliated with any groups or anything, but it's such a minority that it causes a real, well, who the hell cares, you know? And that's entertainment. But I think that that's also what I'm talking about, is that there's a movement on behalf of anti-wokeness to get us back to who the hell cares. Now, I'm not saying that you should stand up for your community. It's not your responsibility, and it may be relative. I don't know if you would even consider it marginalized or just not even acknowledged, you know, other than some, what to call people. Exactly. Yeah, I don't know. But given that tensions were already so high surrounding this movie, Peter Dinklage's comments went mega viral, to the point where mainstream outlets like Fox News were reporting on it. As a result, Disney responded by changing the entire direction for the film. We are taking a different approach with these 7 characters and have been consulting with members of the dwarfism community, they said in a statement. We look forward to sharing more as the film heads into production after a lengthy development period. Disney responding and changing the entire direction of their film just because Peter Dinklage wasn't happy is truly representative of how powerful he was in Hollywood. But nobody expected how badly Disney would botch their second attempt at not offending anyone. They decided to replace the dwarves with what they called magical creatures, which were basically a group of 7 people in goofy outfits with no defining characteristics. So now they're remaking the movie. They just got rid of the dwarfs. Okay, but what do they call them? Why would they get rid of the dwarfs though? Magical creatures, but they have one token dwarf amongst these magical creatures. That's also more offensive to the dwarf community than we're looking at updating stories and everything. You actually just went backwards. You actually just erased the dwarfism side of it. The disability, we're a disability group, you just erased that whole image. The magical creatures change backfired so hard that Disney backpedaled again. Only this time they decided to go with horrible-looking CGI dwarves that would be supported by a cast of voice actors. And only one of the 7 dwarves, Grumpy to be specific, was voiced by an actual little person. It's a bad thing. I'm not agreeing with it. 1, because what they're doing is pretty much you're replacing jobs that people could have as little people. Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. It's for dwarfs. Even though it seems like Peter Dinklage was trying to stand up and defend little people, he actually ended up receiving a lot of criticism from the dwarf community, with many believing that he single-handedly robbed a demographic of potential jobs. The first to call Peter out publicly was WWE wrestler Hornswoggle. I mean, my biggest thing is he wants to be progressive and it's all about progression, and I support that completely. But the issue is, him being progressive is eliminating 7 potential dream jobs from the dwarf acting community. And that's my issue here, is he's saying he wants to move forward and do good for the community when these are dream jobs. I got hired by WWE. WWE was my dream job since I was 4 years old. Since I was 4 years old, all I wanted to be was a WWE superstar. And in any other circumstance, it wouldn't have been able to be done by me. I'm not 6 feet, I'm not 250 pounds, but they were looking for a person like me, a little person to fill this role. And although he was much more articulate and nuanced on Fox News, years later, he was much more blunt and direct about his feelings towards Peter. I feel like you're one of the most recognizable little people on the planet. You, Peter Dinklage. That's real heat too. I hate him. He cost so many people in my community jobs with that Snow White bull. Pisses me off. He wanted to make a statement, and he thought he was making some cool hip thing, but it wasn't. When he did Elf, that check cashed just fine. Tyrion Lannister was a role for a little person. He cashed that check for all those years. I'm okay not going out for Brad Pitt's role. Give me Grumpy or Happy or Sleepy in a major Disney remake. Yeah, come on. And then you're going to have 7 dwarves, then they're extras, then there are stunt doubles that are all going to get paid. Comedian Brad Williams has also been open about how he feels towards Dinklage's comments. It was Dinklage and then he kicked a lot of us out of a movie. so now it's me. And while Brad likes to be silly when talking about this since he's a comedian, he is serious about how he feels about Peter Dinklage. I tell you what I would have played. I would have played a dwarf in the live-action Snow White movie, but then they took out the dwarves. Thanks, Dinklage. Are you watching, Dinklage? Do you know that you took work away from me and my 6-year-old dwarf daughter? You took money and food out of my 6-year-old daughter's mouth. Thanks, Dink. Did you really get upset? Yeah, look legit upset. But some little people in Hollywood, like Lee Gill, were not as harsh towards Dinklage. He felt that his heart was in the right place, but maybe wasn't as clear with his criticism. Lee felt that it was just the story that should be updated, but I think it should kind of just be seen as a great opportunity to update it. And if you think about it, the Seven Dwarfs are kind of the heroes of that tale. And if you give all 7 of them some real depth and a bit more of an important part in the film, that's 7 great opportunities for dwarf actors. Zach Roloff from Little People Big World expressed the same sentiments. So if the story is offensive, change the story. Don't change the characters. However, the harshest criticism towards Peter is that he has become a gatekeeper in Hollywood, that he somehow has the authority to decide what roles little people should or shouldn't get. Peter Dinklage made it to the top and took the ladder with him. Peter Dinklage wanted all the glory. Others just straight up called him a hypocrite. Peter Dinklage, little people shouldn't play fantasy dwarves. It's offensive. Also, Peter Dinklage plays fantasy dwarves in Narnia, Game of Thrones, Avengers Endgame. But what's even worse is that it does look like Dinklage's comments may have made Hollywood studios scared to cast little people in any role that might merely be considered offensive. The biggest example of this would be the casting of the average-sized Hugh Grant in 2023's Wonka. Instead of hiring an actual dwarf or little person, they simply chose to CGI Hugh Grant down to a small size to make him into an Oompa Loompa. Actor Mark Povinelli, who has dwarfism, compared it to one of the most disgusting forms of discrimination in entertainment history. They're trying to maintain the physicality of dwarfism, but erase the authenticity of dwarfism, which is troubling. And that's why you go, well, this is like a physical version of blackface. Even Warwick Davis, who has a huge following because of his fantasy roles, has politely mentioned that these comments have effectively silenced the community in a way that might be permanent. It's a shame, because there's a lot of really talented short actors in the world, but they're not getting a chance to do what they do. Some of them have trained for years to do this, and they're just not getting a look in. You know, it would be wrong to cast someone as a disabled person in a wheelchair with an able body, I think. But they're doing it all the time with short people. I'm not actively campaigning on this, but it would be nice if my voice was heard on these issues. As of today, Peter Dinklage has never doubled down on his comments or publicly responded to any of the criticism he received. And of course, he still has no trouble getting consistent work in Hollywood, getting roles in movies like Brothers, Transformers, Rise of the Beasts, and The Toxic Avenger. I think the reason why people got so frustrated with him is because he kind of picks and chooses when he wants to be mad or offended on behalf of little people. Peter Dinklage never really positioned himself as the outspoken leader of dwarf representation in Hollywood. He often seemed uncomfortable or downright denied being the spokesperson for an entire community at all. Most of his earlier criticism towards Hollywood was subtle. He simply wanted to be viewed as an actor first. But it was his comments on Snow White that carried the tone and influence of someone speaking on behalf of an entire demographic, and then immediately after distancing himself from that responsibility. It's this constant pushing and pulling throughout his entire career that makes people wonder how much authority Peter actually wants on this issue. And since he has reached the pinnacle of this industry and has no trouble finding work, I don't think we're ever going to get a response from him. There's literally no incentive for him to do anything other than stay silent. All we can hope for at this point is that Hollywood doesn't continue to go down this road of hyper-focusing on not offending anyone and just get back to making real movies again.